Just kidding.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There is actually a countdown in the original song.
It's going.
Okay.
Hello. Oh my goodness.
Yep,
Hello,
I've
we're
just got
on.
We're
on.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
These are my
Hey,
spastic. We're the Three Musketeers. We're kind of spastic, as is obvious, because that start was hilarious. But here's our intro music that will play normally at the beginning.
Who's that coming from somewhere up in the sky? Moving fast and bright as a firefly.
Winners away at round table.
Just
As Chris talks over the intro.
Oh, sorry. Should I be dancing or something?
Oh my goodness.
Oh, that's
I'm not dancing.
So that will normally play at the beginning of all of our streams, but we're just starting out, so it's kind of a cluster right now. Welcome, anybody that's on, watching, etc. I'm Bobby. Hello. This is Chris, the Thunder from Down Under. That's Chris. Wave to the people, Chris.
Yes, that's me.
Yes.
And this is Joey.
Hello, everyone.
The other Thunder from Down Under.
Yeah, the small,
second Thunder.
the younger. I don't want to say smaller. That's rude, right? The younger
Thunder.
Thunder from Down Under.
The younger Thunder from Down Under.
And they are on today. We are going to talk about gun control. Yay! And David
Gun control. Never mind.
We're not going to say the H word here. So we're going to start at a point. The reason I brought on the Aussie and the New Zealander / Aussie to talk about gun control is because specifically our sources today are Vox, but a lot of quote unquote left-leaning sources, they love to bring up Australia whenever they're talking gun control. It's like how when they're talking healthcare, they go, look at Norway, look at this place, look at their go-to for gun control is usually Australia. So I thought, wouldn't it be neat to bring on some real Australians and, tell us how dumb they are?
Yeah.
So
Joey's actually English, so.
All the sources.
He's from Adelaide.
Genetically English, but that's beside the point.
You're in Australia right now. You're in New Zealand right now. It counts. So all the sources we will be referencing today will be in the link for the video when it gets uploaded. As this is still a learning process, we won't have any overlays today. I promise that'll get better. So our sources
do you want to start by reading out? Do you want to start by reading out the sources? Or reading out some of the articles?
Well, our main source, we'll link them, but our main source, the main articles we're going to use for what the left's argument is, because I don't want to straw man them. Let's let them talk for themselves. For all the viewers, it's all coming from Vox. There are tons of other sources that have made very similar or the exact same argument, but our sources for today are all coming from Vox. We'll share those links in the description of the video if you want to go and read it for yourself. But the basic rundown is Australia passed this massive gun control. They did the buyback. They confiscated. How many was it? Can't guess. 650.
It was 650,000 guns that were mandatorily bought back in 1996, just after the Port Arthur shooting.
So they put a lovely spin on it and call it a buyback, but really it's not optional,
It's just, it's just a confiscation.
So they passed this gun legislation. They passed the gun control, and most of what the left says is this worked perfectly. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. Their murder and their suicide rates dropped drastically. So this is what we need to do here. We need to follow the Australian model and implement that same gun control here. That's the most basic, fundamental breakdown of what their argument is.
That's the argument.
All right.
It says in this, it says in this Vox article that, according to Harvard, after the buyback of 1996, firearm suicide rates went down 57%, and firearm homicide rate went down 47%. But in fact, in another article, they take away the word firearm and just say suicide and homicide rate went down, according to Harvard.
Right.
So it's kind of
it's It's sneaky,
Already
right?
there's a lie.
That's
what it is. A lie.
That's on purpose.
It's a
yeah.
lie.
Chris,
All right.
did you just get up and leave?
Chris.
Yes.
Was that a potty break? What just happened? Okay, so so
I had to give the daughter a hug and a kiss goodnight. So
oh,
Oh,
good night, Gabby.
nice.
Oh, oops. I'll delete that.
otherwise, you'll end up on the stream.
Mhm.
That'll be interesting.
So
All right.
Um,
Well, what input do you have?
that's the basic rundown of the argument. We should follow what Australia does because
Mhm.
it's worked perfectly there. Their murder rates went down, their violent crime went down, all of that. That's the basic thing. So what we're going to do today
Yeah.
is we're going to first go over the actual statistics with you guys, the actual numbers. Here's the crime statistics. Here's what actually happened. And then we'll go over some personal experiences that both Joey and Chris have had and talk about if they're the basis of their argument, why the U.S. should follow Australia's gun control, if it holds any water. And by the end, hopefully you guys have made up your own minds with the information that we've provided. Again, all the links will be in the description. So first, Kanga is going to go over, or Joey's going to go over the history of what sparked the Australian gun control legislation in the first place. So you take it away, sir.
Yeah, I can't believe you just told everyone that Kanga was my real name.
I'm so sorry.
Anyway,
I'm sorry,
so
Joey.
yeah, so what started? Yeah, so what set off the confiscation in 1996 was there was a shooting that happened earlier that year in Port Arthur, Tasmania. A man by the name of Martin Bryant, who at the time was in his 30s, he walked onto this tourist destination in Port Arthur, pulled out his rifles and killed 35 people, and injured 23. So after that, the authorities acted quickly and confiscated 650,000 guns later that year. Sorry. So that's what caused the that's what caused the buyback. John Howard was the prime minister at the time, and he he had just been elected in. So his first thing he did as prime minister was to put in extensive gun regulations and also the buyback. That's how it all started. Do you want to go over the statistics?
I wanted to talk a little bit about, before we started on screen, you were telling me a little bit about specifically the perpetrator of the crime that sparked all of this, and
Yes.
I would really like to hear
Let's
some about
go
that.
over him, shall we?
Yes.
So he was born in May 7th, 1967. As a child, he was his mother called him an annoying and a different child. He would always break his toys, and in a psychologist's view, he would never hold down a job. He had a 66 IQ. Psychologists also noted he liked torturing animals. When he was older, he was offered a disability pension, but he refused and instead did work with his father, doing gardening and housework and things like that. When he was 19, I believe, around that time when he was 19, he when they were testing him again for his disability pension, and they added the note, which I'll read out if I can find it. They added the note attached to the paperwork. Father protects him from any occasion which might upset him as he continually threatens violence. Martin tells me he would like to go around shooting people. It will be unsafe to allow Martin out of his parents' control. So clearly we have a mentally unstable, low IQ person, a psychopath, who should not have been able to get a gun by current US law.
But
There
at
was
that
no
time,
background checks when he bought.
and
This
at
was
that
1980. This was well, when he bought, this was 1987. When he bought the guns, it was 1996.
and you were telling me that
So
they didn't have background checks at that time legally. They didn't have anything in place to
Yeah.
keep
yes, they didn't-
convicted criminals or mentally unstable anyone. There was not
Yeah.
even a background check so they jumped from
Yeah.
basically the model.
Yeah, so, mhm.
The model
They
that the
jumped-
left
they
would
jumped
like
from-
us to
yeah.
follow is not to jump straight from not having any background checks or any screening whatsoever to a gun buyback and
Yeah, just no
taking
guns. Yeah.
the rights of law-abiding citizens away as far as ownership of guns. There was
Yeah,
no
and
middle
there's
ground.
yeah, exactly.
they didn't try anything that we have over here before jumping straight to the buyback and the limitations.
Mm-hmm.
That's super fun. There was
if there wasn't any mental wellness check, there wasn't a background check to check for his disability pension or his any criminal records he might have had.
He just strolled right in with cash.
Yeah, he strolled in with cash and bought 2 rifles.
So there was a quote that I really loved that we were discussing before we started rolling. You were talking about how they kind of the mass murderer, they kind of like took his advice to pass laws that he said you should do this. What was that quote?
Yeah. So essentially, this guy, keep in mind, has an IQ of 66, couldn't read or write. He said in a police interview that if guns weren't advertised, it wouldn't have happened. He said that if he couldn't get guns, he wouldn't have gone on the big shooting. He didn't have a gun license, but was free to purchase guns. In fact, the store he bought it was closed down shortly afterwards.
Because they sold to him.
What's funny is So what's funny is they took the serial killer's advice and they just took away all the guns. If guns weren't advertised, it would have happened, he said.
Oh, that's
and the news calls that a confession. And in the interview, I also want to point out in the interview he said one of the comments he made was if unfortunate things like this never happened, then you guys wouldn't have a job. So you could take a few things out of that. You could it doesn't sound like something that would be said by someone with a 66 IQ. This is me just spouting off conspiracy bait, I guess. But it is interesting. Like,
Look, I think there's always a connection to mental illness with a lot of these people. We have one, Stanley Graham. I remember there's a film about this guy. Oh no, this is the wrong one. Sorry. There's a film about a New Zealand actor, and he's famous in Hollywood now. I'll get his name for you in a second. But he did something similar in down in the South Island. He took a rifle and just lost the plot, and he killed, I think, 13 odd people or something like that in a small town. He just was wound up and just lost it one day, and that can happen. But the thing is, if they don't have a gun, they'll have a knife, or with terrorism, there's bombs and things like that they can use, or a car or something. So the fact that there's it's a gun mass murder doesn't really mean anything. And they just overreacted in Australia with the legislation. That's all that happened. But it doesn't actually help with the. So for New Zealand's part, we're portrayed as a very peaceful country, mostly because of tourism, and it is for the most part. Like if you compare it statistically to other countries.
Mm-hmm. I think it's ranked second in the world as the safest country, with number 1 being Iceland.
Yeah, a lot of that's because you don't get to see what locals see. So growing up here is totally different to, and I've got an Australian accent, as anyone that would know. So I spent like half of my life in Australia, and the first half of my life in New Zealand. And growing up here, there are gangs. There's different gangs and things like that. But because of the tourism industry at the time, they don't really. They try and avoid it hitting the media for obvious reasons and things like that. And there's guns around everywhere, really. It's just a matter of they're illegal. Like you have to have a gun license, and you have to rifles are a lot easier. There's gun shops everywhere for rifles because we have a lot of farming. There's a lot of hunting and things like that. So there's gun shops everywhere for that. But as far as handguns, obviously you need a license for that. That's quite hard to get a license for a handgun, or anything like that. But the criminals don't care about that. They'll just they'll just get it whichever way they can.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's quite a few links in the description from news stories that people won't come across. The local corner store, or what they call a milk bar in Australia, and like the smaller stores and that, the convenience store, I guess you call them, like a 7-Eleven type thing, but like more of a family-owned business. There's a lot of them here. They're called a dairy here. So if you search for dairy gun violence or dairy armed robbery or anything like that, New Zealand, or just put NZ in the search, they'll all come up. There's quite a few stories we've got in the description and videos. But what's happening is a lot of these small business keepers, a lot of them are like Indian, not feather for the Americans. But yeah, a lot of them are like Indians or people that have immigrated, and they will have their whole family work in the store. And they don't actually have any way, because of the gun laws, the way the gun laws are, they don't really have a way of defending themselves when people come in, the criminals come in with guns. Yeah. And this is sort of swept under the rug by the media to a large degree. Like, there'll be a story about it that'll go up, but there won't be big, for the most part, there won't be too many big news articles and that. You can find them if you search for them. Like I said, there'll be a few links in the description, but they don't really feel like they have a way of defending themselves, and they're starting to go into stores like gun shops now, rifle shops and things like that, and they're just using the farming rifles, or whatever farmers would use, rifles and shotguns and things like that.
Yeah.
The problem is, unless they actually take full force, they can actually be incriminated in like manslaughter, because they can be incriminated in having possession of a deadly weapon or a gun, a firearm, when they're not supposed to, and actually they can't have it out in the open. So it's a real complicated sort of, they're sort of on a bit of a tightrope with the law, even by doing that, by having one in the shop for self-defense.
Yeah.
So I can only see that getting worse. And I was actually a witness to one of these, so I know it happens. And then I looked into it, and there's actually a lot of stories out there about it, and it's pretty obvious. Like growing up, I had neighbours that had handguns, used to shoot at the back fence. It's just a widespread thing here where there are guns everywhere. They just, if you're willing to, if you don't really care that much about the law, you can get one and you can use it, and it just obviously gets hidden from the media because of the tourism. Doesn't mean it's not a safe country to come to and visit and everything. But and this stuff is not really that hard to find if you go looking for it.
Well, what surprised me when I started digging in to research, and even the statistics and the actual crime bureaus from Australia that are reported, and New Zealand, and even what I had found on actual data and statistics, Joey showed me some stuff today that even that had been skewed, like the sources I was finding, from the reality, because not only did violent crime not go down, but there's been a steady increase. The last source, and all of this will be posted in the description, the last source I looked at said it was such a huge increase in violent crimes such as assault and sexual assault and things like that, 40% more than compared from now to when this was originally passed. And I think that that's a direct, where you can see in the numbers and recordable data, where you can see the effects of people not being able to be armed and protect themselves. Those are the crimes that are occurring, that before this was passed, a woman could prevent herself from being raped by carrying her own weapon. Those are the crimes that you're now seeing reflected in the statistics that are happening because citizens can own guns and protect themselves.
Well, there's quite a lot of like knife crime and things like that as well.
Exactly.
Because if you're a shopkeeper, like the situation that I was witness to, if you're a shopkeeper and people come in with knives and you have a weapon like a firearm, you can deter them straight away. Like, you can solve that problem straight away as a deterrent, and you don't have to fire one shot. But if you're not armed in any way, and like you can't, you've got no options. You just have to let it, go through its course.
Joey, what were you going to say?
Looking at the chart now. So after the gun ban, firearm deaths didn't go down until 2001. After there was a big spike. Knife and sharp instrument deaths actually went up, and especially spiked in 2001. Interestingly enough, there's more of a trend downwards from the gun ban of people dying by hands and feet than there is by guns. So
makes sense.
That's ridiculous. It frustrates me. Like, I have the same opinion when it comes to gun control in the States.
I was just going to say, you can see this all in the links that are going to be
Yeah,
in the description.
we'll provide.
Sorry, do continue.
And we're gonna continue to get better at this so that all these overlays and information will be available when we are streaming. But for right now, it'll all you guys can follow up. Every single source that we've cited will be available there. We're not just pulling numbers out of our, you know what's. So it just surprised me because a lot of the information I had found when I started researching this topic and wanted to have you guys on to talk about it, even the closest thing to what would be considered like supporting the left's stance that this worked, this gun control worked. The closest data I found to that was statistics that had been slightly misrepresented to say that right after 2 years after the buyback and the instituting of this like really strict gun laws and in Australia, that the homicide and the gun violence had dropped off dramatically for 2 years and then slowly like steadily risen back up to above and beyond what it was before this was passed. But Joey found a lot of statistics today that showed me that even that information had been misrepresented, and in fact there was literally there's no difference in the crime in the
there was a spike in spike in like general violent crime after the gun law was passed in until 2001, 2002, and then it's just started going down the same rate it was going down before any of this happened, except with no mass shootings, just because obviously less guns, less mass shootings. But when mass shootings make up such a small amount of violent crime, it just it's barely, you know. It's hardly, you should hardly mention it, and it shouldn't be what drives gun debate.
No,
you know?
And I think to look at the mass shootings and say, well, we've had less mass shootings because there hasn't been none, but to say we've had less mass shootings, but we have 40% more per capita rapes in our country now than when this was passed, I don't think that's not a trade-off I would make. Women should be allowed to carry a firearm. I think a lot of those statistics of the rise in burglaries, robberies, assaults, that has to do with people not being armed to protect themselves. That's reflected in the statistics now. All the crime that would have been prevented before is now showing.
Yeah, the media over here just blames men for that. The rape stats and stuff.
Those men. Oh.
Yeah.
Teach men not to rape everyone.
That's what they do. They don't say that, you know, women should be able to protect themselves. They just say, oh, it's men. Basically, as a general overarching sort of theme, it's just men.
Right. Well, instead of asking the question of why did these categories of robbery, assault, sexual assault, there's several categories of crime that are 40% more happening more per capita since this gun ban was passed. And instead of asking the question of why is that, and digging into the why of it, they want to find a scapegoat that also supports all their connected ideology. But I like to ask the why. And so many of those, when you dig into them, the statistics of them, it has to do with they don't have the same means to protect themselves from one-on-one violent crime anymore. It's been taken away to prevent one mass shooting a year.
Yeah, no, you're right.
It's not one mass shooting a year in Australia. That's the other thing as well. That mass shooting was like the only mass shooting for like 30 years or something or more.
Yeah.
At that level. It's not like, that's the other thing. It's nowhere near as frequent in Australia as it is in the US. Like, I think you've had, in the last year, there's, you know, they try and say there's like 72 or something, but there's there's about four legitimate mass shootings. Well, the really big one in Vegas in the US, and some school shootings in the
And then
there's nothing like that.
Like 12.
Nothing like that happens in Australia. You'll get one in 50 years.
Yeah.
So
and that's mostly just because of population. It's also because of
it's just not comparable.
The gang problem, less big cities, you know.
Yeah.
Right. I would think legislation-wise, if they wanted to protect women, you know, the only equalizer that women have, the only equalizer we have is a firearm. If a 250
self-defense in general, but the firearm is the ultimate equalizer.
Right. But if a 200,
we don't have a better equalizer at the moment. So.
No, we don't. And if a 250-pound muscled guy comes at me and I don't have a firearm, I don't have a hope I don't have a hope. There's no way I'm going to be able to stop
Shame.
whatever he's determined to do. So
Shame on you. You didn't do the push-ups. Men and women are equal, all right?
I'm not enough Pilates. It's on me, right?
Man.
Yoga. The more yoga.
More yoga.
Or
and then I'll be able to
what
stop
do they call
that
those exercises? The
250-pound guy.
pelvic floor exercises or something?
Yeah, the Kegels. I need to Kegel more.
Kegels. You got to do more of those because that'll help you when someone weighs 3 times as much
Yes.
as you with muscle.
You've heard it
Yes.
here. You
More
guys have
yoga.
heard it here
Gonna
on
drink
the
cold
dive.
water. That's always-
Kegling prevents rape. That's a thing.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
So, I just think I don't understand why when you get down to it, and they try these things like the buyback
Yeah.
and the gun control in Australia, and you attempt these kinds of like crazy
'Cause people-
legislation, but you look at the actual case that spurred this all on, the mass shooting, the Tasmanian mass shooting, mental health issues
You can't say
recorded.
much about it other than what we're doing now because they don't actually expect people to look into it because once you look into it, you realize that they're just even on the surface, it's not actually comparable. You're talking about 2 totally separate countries that
Right,
don't have
different
anything
cultures,
really to do with
different dynamics,
Yeah.
different criminal history as far as these mass shootings and
Different
our records
population,
and our statistics.
sparsity
Yeah.
of population as well. There's something like 3 people for every square kilometre in Australia compared to probably 10 times that in the US. That plays a part too.
I mean, the goal has always been and always will be to falsely correlate legally guns legally owned by private citizens and gun crime, which there's no correlation and there's never been.
Right.
It's that's the idea they want to plant in your head, you know.
Yeah. No, I just think
Okay.
it confuses me as to why when you dig in and you ask the why questions, because that's always, to me, I like information. I like digging in on a topic. I like knowing why.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
for me, you can look at the statistics and the numbers and the crime statistics, and I want to know why is this happening. So the case that started this legislation, started this particular kind of gun control in Australia and for New Zealand, and I look at it and I go, okay, history of mental illness, a known threat to society where he had said he wanted to kill people and he had negative thoughts like that. IQ below the point where he was considered mentally handicapped.
Yeah. He couldn't read or write. Couldn't read or write. And negligence on the part of the person selling the firearms, both times.
Right. So
once when he bought it from the shop, and the other time when he bought it from a newspaper.
Mm-hmm. And when you ask the why, and you get into that, then you start to look at why they will not address those whys. Because you look at every mass shooting in the States, and there's always a history of mental health issues, a criminal history, like where it's not out of nowhere that these people were known risks to society, that they had exhibited behavior or had a record to indicate they were going to harm people. But they will not address the mental health. The mental health side of it, they will not address how we handle that.
There's clear indicators for it all.
Yeah, it's clear.
Right.
Like every case, when you dig down on it, it's clear. But they won't. You can't get legislation introduced to improve our mental health system or improve how that's handled as far as access to buying guns. Because I don't think anyone on either side would argue that somebody that has a diagnosed mental health issues that are severe enough and a history of threatening harm or harming themselves, or they are dangerous to society or themselves, I don't think anyone would argue, no, that person needs to be able to buy a gun. I don't think...
Yeah, and when it's a case of negligence on the part of the lawmakers, when it's people not checking for licenses, not checking for, not doing background checks, when the federal government fails, you don't want to be putting more duties on the part of the federal government. You don't want, when they fail to do background checks, you don't also want them to legislate more gun control because they've proven that they're not good at it, and they can't hope to achieve the same result as, say, social shaming, just even just I don't know, good parenting, like in the inner city gangs, one of the biggest, like there's more of a correlation between poverty and gun violence than there is gun ownership and gun crime. It's always been that way.
Well, and they never want to talk about, like, I like that you can take the statistics now from Australia and New Zealand and literally see the results of all of the preventative uses of guns not being there. See the increase in rape.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge, you think about it, 40%, that's a huge increase. Almost,
Yeah.
I mean,
That's astronomical.
that's huge. 40% more rapes and one-on-one assaults.
Even in the US, even if it has one of the higher murder rates in the Western world, it has one of the lowest burglary rates.
Yeah.
It has one of the lower rape rates compared to the other Western countries. It has like total crimes per like 1,000 people. It's usually less. It's even less than New Zealand. It's like New Zealand has 3 times the amount of incidents of crime than the US does, adjusted for size and everything.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
That makes a lot of sense based on what you see. There are some areas that you've got to be really careful in New Zealand, but they're not. They're the really highly concentrated urban sort of areas. They're not so much
urban areas.
You find anywhere in the rural areas for the most part. There's no issue at all, and it's completely. You get a real polarizing effect where the urban areas can be quite risky, and you've got to watch. You wouldn't go into them without a local that knows, where not to step, basically. But anywhere rural is fine because for a start, that's where a lot of the tourists go. That's where the country people are. That's where, and that's where all the guns are. Funnily enough, too, because that's a big farming thing, and that's where all the gun ownership is in the rural areas. So
another thing to add into consideration is the fact that the US has more big cities than any of these countries.
Oh, when I referred to gun ownership, by the way, I was talking about legal gun ownership. It's in the rural areas. There's plenty of illegal gun ownership in the other areas.
There's also the estimate that out of all the gun crimes committed, only 13%. I think it's like something like 10 to 13% of the people actually committing the crimes with the guns illegally. It's not many because they can't. People with a history of violence will be the ones committing the crimes.
Yeah,
indeed. Statistics bear that out as well. A lot of people in the States, I think, they don't realize gun control advocates, especially women. It kind of drives me nuts because I think you don't even realize how much culturally you're benefiting from people having the right to own guns because of our Second Amendment and the way things currently are, right? There's no way to record or put into statistical proof how many times a guy intended to rape a woman and thought, well, she could be carrying a gun. So not even being a gun owner, just knowing in our culture that anybody can be carrying, anybody can have their concealed carry and have a weapon. People do not realize that you do have the recordable instances, the crimes that end up being reported where a gun does save a life, where a gun does prevent a crime. We have that we can look at, but you can't, there's no way to look at culturally how many of those times that crime was not committed just because the perpetrator thought they could have a gun because anybody here can have a gun. So people who don't even own guns, people that don't even own guns themselves are culturally benefiting from our Second Amendment and the way our culture is set up.
The thing about that is it was laid out at the foundation in when was the Constitution? Was it 1776 it was written? Oh, that's the Declaration of Independence. So it was 17. When the Second Amendment was written, whenever it was, around that time, that laid the foundation right from the start. Where if we had that in our country, like the thing is we don't really have a big problem at the moment in a lot of areas, but it's very easy for the government to bring in massive gun control, as we've seen in Australia. And there's no bulwark against that to stop it.
And clearly people are happy with just handing in their guns when the government says, "Oh, we will help,"
which is illogical. It's completely illogical because the thing is, none of the criminals are going to hand in their guns.
No,
and
the only reason they'd participate in a mandatory buyback is if the gun was at their head. And
that's right. They won't. They're not going to tell you where the gun is, or the criminals and that have got a history of violence, and they're usually growing up in poverty, and it's like the expansion of the welfare state perpetuates that as well. Yeah, it does. It's just like, when you've been on the ground, like I've actually, it's anecdotal, but it's still evidence in a way because I've lived it and seen what happens with these when they stay in that welfare system and it's just a circular thing, eventually they turn to crime, unfortunately. And that's the thing. And once they go down that path, their illegal gun is just not something they're going to give up. It's like part of them.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes back to the fact that there's no correlation between legal gun ownership and gun crime or violent crime in general. It's not a, law-abiding citizens by definition are the ones committing the crimes, and they're not the ones.
Another thing is, if you ever speak to someone, or if you know someone personally that's had any involvement at any point with like sort of serious gang issues, a lot of them will, even if they have to obtain it illegally, will have a gun just in case. Just in case. They're not going to use it other than for self-defense, but just in case. They're not worried about the complications of having to go to court or go to, do some time for having a firearm illegally. It's because they've had some sort of involvement, even if they haven't been in a gang or anything like that. They know someone. And when you know someone, that's, you've got to sort of protect yourself. And that tells you something. It's like, well, if they'll have a gun illegally just for having some sort of involvement at some point within, I guess is the darker side of society, or there's someone told me once that I know quite well that either way you've got to pay the tax man. So if you go down that path, you've got to pay the tax man, which is, but they're less forgiving, or you pay your taxes the normal way by working a job and having them take a third of your money or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's like insurance for them, is having that firearm there. It's just they can't, over here they can't, a handgun or, stand a lot of normal, or not normal, but, what you would have is a concealed carry over there, or a standard sort of everyday carry, I think you call them. You just can't have here. You've got to have a reason for it, like you're hunting or something, or you've got a farm and you need it for the farm or whatever.
Yeah.
So, like I'd love to have a Second Amendment to be able to conceal and carry. It's just insurance, because like when I've spoken to a lot of Americans, and that's what they say is they may have never used it, but it's just like having that, knowing that it's there. It just gives them the peace of mind.
It's completely harmless just to use it passively, and it saves lives because people won't pull out guns there.
I think it feels much better to have it, especially and not need it, than not like I can't imagine if I was ever out with my children at a theme park or an event. Like I've heard a lot of people talking recently, and people that are in the media or more popular figures or more famous. I've heard a lot of people mention lately that they don't like to go out to big public crowded events like concerts, like things like, because of the fear of mass shooting. And I always think I don't want to get shut up in my house and stop going out, or stop taking my kids out when and if I can, and I would prefer to be armed.
Well, the thing about that,
and think I have a shot to stop.
The thing about that,
then
go on.
Oh no, you're fine. I paused. Go ahead, sir.
The thing about that, it's an interesting thing, because from here, like when you talk to people in general. Like if you listen to any sort of conservative media, you'll hear the stories that get buried even over there with the mainstream media, which is about I think there was a school shooting somewhere that was stopped really quickly. No one died, but the shooter died. Mm-hmm. But it was actually I think he was taken down by not the janitor, but one of the staff that was actually armed. But you don't hear about that unless you listen to conservative media.
Yeah.
And it was stopped. And same with the church shooting, where he went and that didn't hardly got any coverage on mainstream. But then with the conservative media, he was going to another. He was actually stopped by an NRA member.
Yeah, it was Steve Williford, the Baptist pastor and NRA instructor. Like that shooting was.
He was on. He was on Louder with Crowder.
Yeah, it was
shout out Louder, subscribe, join.
That was a more deadly shooting than the one in Parkland. But Parkland got all the thing because it was about saving kids, and they were sending the message.
Right.
But that guy would have gone and shot up another church.
People shooting more white people,
that guy was on his way to shoot up another church.
That was another.
So he saved like 20, 30 lives or more.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but people didn't talk about that like the Parkland shooting was a clear-cut example of our system falling apart. He had committed domestic violence. His
Yeah.
domestic violence record had not been properly input into the system, so it did not pop on the background check. It didn't prevent him from
Yeah, the FBI was
purchasing
already involved with
firearms.
him and was
Yes.
negligent. Like,
So-
they were meant to check on him, but they didn't.
And the same thing with Hogg, David Hogg, the Florida shooting.
Hmm.
That he had already been on record as a danger to the community, as that more action should have been taken to prevent these things. And
Yeah,
I
it was Cruz.
see this happen over and over again, where they won't highlight how our current system is not being enforced, is not being used the way it's meant to be used. They don't want to look at that.
Yeah.
They don't want to go, hey, this can't be messed around with.
I think-
The background
I
checks
think
need
another-
to be
yeah.
taken seriously, and this system needs to be used as it's intended to be used. But mainstream media, a lot of the politicians on a particular side, they will not talk about that aspect of these situations because they don't want anybody focused on fixing our system and having it work the way it should with the background checks and the way it's supposed to function currently, because they know if it was enforced the way it should be, all of those are prevented. But they don't want to talk about that because they want to use these situations to disarm legal, law-abiding citizens. So they won't talk about how it could actually be fixed, which is enforcing our current system the way it's supposed to be enforced. Sorry,
Yeah.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to make a point about the people don't really understand a lot of this stuff when you talk to them about it over here, because they do get that version of things with the mainstream media.
And there's no defense for it in Australia, so that's all you hear.
Well, it's not comparable at all. It's like, why would you need a firearm and all that? That's a responsible gun owners thing that I was going to talk about, which the idea that there's no such thing, the myth that there's no such thing as a responsible gun owner, because you got like a gun range, you go and you can learn how to shoot. There's defensive shooting. There's all these sorts of things. We basically don't really have any culture of that in our country, where you learn defensive techniques and all this stuff. Where the only people that really teach it, as far as I know, are like with Avi Yemeni, who's the reporter, the guy that he ran for office in Melbourne recently. He runs IDF teaches Krav Maga, and he used to be a sniper in the military over there. So he teaches a lot of that stuff, like the techniques and obviously, things with guns and all that as well. But there's very few where you can actually learn that. Whereas in the US, you can learn all that. Not only can you have a weapon and conceal and carry it, but you can learn how to be responsible with it. And I think that USCCA is another thing, which is the US Concealed Carry Association or something. They do courses and things like that. Well, that'd be a great thing to have, where you know how to defend yourself and that. Because really, it's just like if you learn something like martial arts or self-defense techniques, having a firearm is just an extension of that can equalize.
And
when you're
martial arts
outmatched.
isn't really going to do anything if you're being approached by a guy with a gun,
Well,
I was more referring to self-defense in general.
Yeah, I think.
But-
I think every woman should take a self-defense course, because you never know what situation you're going to be in. I'm not saying there's no place for that. We should teach self-defense, especially young women. But the reality of the situation is you can be versed in all kinds of hand-to-hand combat stuff and self-defense, and if a much larger guy comes at you, no matter what you've been trained with, there's a better chance that he's gonna overpower you. I mean, it's just the reality of the situation. You take, I mean, it's like I don't know if you ever saw, but when Not Gay Jared arm wrestled the gal that works for Louder with Crowder, right? And she's kind of a badass, she's pretty and Jared's kind of skinny and wimpy, and he still smoked her. And the whole point of doing that was showing a woman that does the CrossFit and does I think she does boxing, and she's obviously got some guns on her. Like, this is a really strong woman. Biologically, men's muscle tissue is denser, bone is denser. You're built to be stronger than us. So to me, the only equalizer,
biological fact.
Yeah, especially if I'm out alone with my kids and I know my first job is to protect my kids, it's the only equalizer. It's the only thing that I know that no matter what's coming at us, whether it's a giant grizzly bear or mountain lion, or a couple drunk idiots or whatever. It's the only equalizer that I know for sure I can protect those kids.
Yeah.
So
and that's what they try and the narrative they get pushed that gets pushed. And this has come up in a few of the Change My Minds, where they try and push this narrative of I'm a man, I can go out for a jog and don't have to worry about being assaulted and this, that, So that's nonsense because if there's 4 or 5 drunken idiots that just you happen to come across their path if you're going for a jog and they want to start something with you, same thing, you're not going to be able to defend yourself unless you've got some sort of equalizer. That's 95% of the time or more going to be a deterrent,
Right.
So a firearm is probably the best way to do that because people know instantly when they see it that they can't do anything about that. You've got the advantage.
Yep.
So it's just and that's what happens. I know with a lot of the stats over there with the defensive incidents involving guns. A lot of the time nothing actually happens. It's just a deterrent. So
Yeah, I agree.
We don't have that option. So that's the case with men as well, where they try and say, "Oh, it's just because women, it's men's fault somehow." Basically, that they have privilege.
Talking about stuff like that, trying to just blame men. It's just talking in circles. It's like you're not offering a solution. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Men commit rapes, and what's the solution? Yeah. And they won't take it that far. They'll go, oh, it's all men. It's men's fault. And you go, well, how do we fix this? How do we? And they will not go down that path because it ends in what I just said, that a gun is the only equalizer. You can't have guns either. So even if you agree with their premise and go, okay, it's just men are horrible. So what do we do about protecting ourselves, or what do we do about that getting? It's always fantasy
they might say something
stuff.
They might say something like pepper spray, but a pepper spray, it's not. That's.
Yeah, it's just.
It might just piss them off.
Right. Well,
especially when it's like
air horn or whatever.
You can't. It's a bit harder to pepper spray a group of guys.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. If there's more than one, you're just. And with home invasion.
I don't understand. What I don't understand is how it's the ultimate empowerment of a woman. Like for the feminists out there, it's the ultimate empowerment of a woman. You don't want to say, okay, you can have the air horn. That's your best. That's the best defensive. That's the best equalizer we're going to give you: an air horn or pepper spray, or a taser. You can't have the gun though. You can't have the absolute best deterrent. We can't. We're not going to empower you that much because it interferes with our narrative.
Yeah,
it's like it's limiting women's empowerment to what fits into their tidy little story.
No, I wish I could take a whole group of my left-leaning girlfriends and go on a trip for the weekend and go have them do target practice and go shoot. It is an adrenaline rush, and it's fun when you learn and you know how to do it properly, and it's very fun. And you do understand.
I'd love to do it as a man.
Yeah,
we can't here. Really?
Well,
not with a handgun. We can do it. We can do it with rifles. If you go onto a farm and you're with over here, if you go onto a farm and you're with someone that has a license, you don't have to have a license yourself, and you can shoot. You can go hunting and stuff. But I can't go to I've got to have the special licenses and go to a gun range, and that's the only place I can't. You can't conceal carry. It's just restricted, and it's even more restricted in Australia.
Yeah.
So but it's ridiculous, really.
What were you gonna say, Joey?
Don't worry, it's all good. We're
going to shut up now because I'm ranting.
Anyway, so how long are we going?
Well, we might have to take Chris. We might have to get Chris an actual stopwatch. So
you can get a little thing and put it above my head or whatever.
We'll give him a little stopwatch. But no, I think in our conclusion at this point is we've dug into the data. And basically what happened was Australia passed this massively restrictive gun laws where basically you're a citizen, you can't carry around protection for yourself. You can't own this, you can't own that. You can't, farmers in rural communities can own rifles for animals endangering their livestock or whatever. And that's about it in Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the data bears out.
Went down. Yeah.
And
legally.
Yeah. So murder barely went down. Knife murders went up until 2001. After that, it started going down the same rate as it did before the gun ban. and burglaries and rapes have gone up. So
Yeah.
hope that was worth it.
Personal
Australian
assault.
Gun Control Lobby.
Yeah, personal assaults,
Yeah.
carjackings, robberies, rape, especially the sexual assault thing bothers me. 40% increase. Now we're talking about from when this was passed to currently right now. So 1998 to now, 40% more sexual assaults occur in Australia than before this was passed.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you that is if women could protect themselves, that's not happening. Those numbers wouldn't be anywhere near that. And women don't understand how much, even non-gun owners don't understand how much they benefit from American culture when it comes to guns, and how you not owning one doesn't mean that any assailant or any person that thinks even for a moment to do you harm doesn't have to stop and think she might be carrying though. You are benefiting culturally.
Yeah.
They don't have to think that here. And it's a similar thing with the shopkeepers that I was talking about. Criminals don't have to wonder whether or not the shopkeeper is going to have a gun.
They don't have to be.
Because they know they don't.
They
know that if
they know they're vulnerable. They know women are more vulnerable.
Well, they know that all they have to do is come in with a kitchen knife, and the shopkeeper is going to be vulnerable.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah.
So personal crimes went up. Basically, all of the crime categories that are prevented by gun ownership in the States, that all went up. The murder rates and suicide rates really didn't change at all. You don't see any difference from comparatively population size to what goes on in the States. You do see a difference. There is a higher one-on-one violent crime rate than here in the States. They have more one-on-one violent crime like sexual assault, burglary, things like that, than what we have in the States because they gave up all their guns. So, in conclusion...
Total instances is way higher. Yeah.
What is way higher? Say again?
Total instances of crimes. Like as I said, New Zealand, it's like 3 times as much as is it in the US.
Well,
just total crime incidents. Yeah.
That's mirror glasses.
And I think, like what Chris was talking about the other day, that when you have an environment, what is it?
Alrighty. Well,
it's like he forgets we're doing a thing. We're gonna get him a stopwatch, and we're gonna get him like, no, you have to stay here. But he was talking about the other day, like in New Zealand, because anybody who follows the law is not owning a gun because they're not legally allowed to, but the gangs don't care. And so in New Zealand, he was telling me about how the gangs have kind of taken over. They have way more power and authority in the culture and the communities and in politics over there. Because
they have for years. I'll see if I can look up the there was a prime minister we had over here that this might be a half an urban myth. So don't say, that it's exactly factual or anything like that. But I heard stories about a New Zealand Prime Minister that wasn't, when he died, he passed like from years and years ago. He was carried out by, I can't remember which Prime Minister either, which makes it even harder. But he was carried out by 4 gang members at his funeral. The pallbearers. That's who they were. So, they have more influence than and in some cases they actually have more influence than the police, the cops and everything. So, that's, but you don't know that unless you're you grew up in certain areas in the culture. So, if you know a few different ethnic groups and so on. So that's the thing. Like I've got experience with it because it's hard to describe because it's not like there's news articles written on it constantly or anything like that because of things like tourism, and they don't want to create the impression that we're an unsafe country or anything. But it's underbelly, like that show in Australia called Underbelly. That's kind of like what it is. It's a hidden.
No, it's just like there's beautiful places to go in Mexico to vacation and so on and so forth, but the cartels run entire sections of that country. So it's the same thing. It doesn't. Still go to New Zealand, guys. Still go visit. Go do the Crocodile Dundee thing in Australia. Come there. We're not saying it's it's not like the mythical rape rate on campuses like the war-torn Congo. Go and visit.
Another thing too is you've got to take it with things like the crime stats. You've got to take into account the fact that it's the way the demographics are set up with population is totally different as well. You know,
Right.
like you look at the population of New Zealand, and things are going to be magnified in certain areas. And like I said, the biggest contrast probably is if you actually broke down the stats from the urban. I haven't looked into this enough yet, but if you broke down the stats in the urban areas and compared them to the rural areas, any of the country areas would be totally different to a lot of the urban areas, and like the cities and things like that.
Well, yeah, that's
Like,
I mean that's how it is over here too. You have way
Yeah,
higher
yeah.
crime rates in any area where there's a larger population
And-
of
and it
people
gets,
concentrated.
In New Zealand, we have a homelessness. Or it's not.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not really a homelessness. The left over here likes to call it a homelessness crisis because then they get to step in and be the hero, so called. But it's really a housing crisis. The building isn't. There's a lot of regulation around everything, and it's too hard to build quick enough to supply.
Yeah.
So you have that causes issues, obviously, because you've got an increase of people that aren't stable. So that causes issues with crime and things like that, for sure. But if you're not in the areas that are affected by that, then you won't see it at all. Because so it doesn't give a very good.
That's why I generally.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
when you're digging into an issue like this, you always have to look at national crime statistics and compare it to what was happening the decade before, the year before. Like, just that's the only way to bear out issues like this. Because if you only take anecdotal like evidence and people's personal experience, it does not give you a bigger picture, and you can't really get to the why. Like, what's the relationship?
Yeah, and you
why?
can't just take a.
Hmm.
Talking about
Yeah, but the thing is, like, if you can, you,
sorry,
It's it's Joey's turn.
Yeah, all right. Sorry. Okay. You can't just take gun crime as well. You have to take all violent crime as well. Not like it's really easy to point to the U.S. and say, "Oh, the gun homicide rate's so much higher there," which it is, but it also has more guns. But you have to look at all homicide in general, and if homicide rate with guns goes down, and it doesn't mean anything if like knife homicides go up.
Right.
It doesn't. If it doesn't change, then it's not. It doesn't matter.
Right. And they love to make that. They in some of the sources I sent you, you could see how they like misrepresented it that way. Because they would neglect to tell you that the homicide rate was the exact same or higher than the year before. They would only say, but gun homicides went down or firearm homicides went down. So they were kind of misrepresenting the results of this legislation by saying, well, firearm deaths and firearm. But when you dig into it and look at the overall crime, it didn't change at all. People just picked up different weapons. That's all.
Yeah,
Like,
that's right. That's what they always do.
Because evil people are going to find ways to do evil either way.
Right.
But they work with what's given to them,
Right. So
human beings do evil.
Yeah. So in conclusion on this topic, we're going to give you guys all the sources. If you don't believe us, dig into it yourself. Australia, New Zealand's gun control.
Dig into it properly.
Yes.
It's very. I can tell you just one. This is the last thing I'll say, which is it's very, very frustrating because I listen and watch and all that to a lot of conservative media. I'll listen to a lot of left wing sources just to get a balance because it's good to understand where the left's coming from, which is all just emotion a lot of the time. But it is very frustrating for us when we get compared to the US in ways because it's just not accurate. So if you're going to dig into it properly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's all I'd say.
Well, that's the tagline of our channel. It's the dive, and it's going deep every time. So
commit to that shit.
Yes, the surface is always worse. You got to deep dive.
Yeah.
So we'll give you guys all the information. Come at it. If you find information that's got different results than us, share it in the comments, link that stuff, whatever. But from everything that I have found and everything these guys found, the results were the crime rate literally did not change when it came to crimes resulting in death, so homicides, things like that. The crime rate when it came to personal...
Very, very little difference, if any.
And the crime rate when it came to personal assaults, sexual assaults, robberies, one-on-one crimes, drastically increased because people can't protect themselves now. So, and in all of this legislation, they did their buyback, they did this massive gun control, They did not in any way address the reason this man committed the mass murder, the mass shooting that started all of this. They didn't address how mental health issues are handled. They didn't address caring for or taking care of people who are literally mentally handicapped, below the IQ level to be mentally handicapped. They didn't address them accessing weapons or a separate system. None of that changed. They just took law-abiding citizens' guns away and increased their rates by 40%.
Yeah, go
on. So that's our conclusion when it comes to that stuff. You guys feel free to add any information in the comments. We're going to do a quick shout out. I'm going to open a box of cookies and we're going to shout out the maker of these. But I wanted Chris and Joey in that order to be able to shout out their stuff first. Channels, what they're promoting, their things. You guys go ahead, Chris, and then Joey.
Yeah, sure. We've got just a family blog that just explains where we are and where we've come from and everything, which is thesilenttable.com. And we're starting a travel planning soon to bring US conservatives to Australia and New Zealand and help plan their travel and everything. So that'll be coming up in the next couple of months or so. We'll have a site up with details for that. And so that the idea of that will be to bring conservatives here and help them travel and experience Australia and New Zealand. And same thing with people that want to travel to the States as well. So, so sort of create a connection, a conservative connection between Australia and New Zealand and the US. Same thing with products as well. So New Zealand made products and Australia made products to the US and US made products here as well. Try and create a connection there to help strengthen the West. So that's where we're going and everything. But at this stage, we've just got our main blog that I mentioned.
Where can they find that blog at? What's the web address for that?
Thesilenttable.com.
Okay, and what is your channel, your YouTube channel?
It's NZ Aussie Bear is the name of the channel.
Awesome. We'll probably put that in the links too. And then Joey. Joey's a magician with the music.
I don't have much to do with this. I don't have much to do with this, but I also happen to make music, I guess. So providing the theme music wasn't interrupted by Chris today. I made the intro of the stream.
Yeah.
I also do music on it's on YouTube, it's on SoundCloud, it's on Spotify, it's on YouTube Music. Under the name Korai, Korai. It's probably gonna be in the links as well. That's all. Not much more to
we'll put the links up there, and he's being humble. He made he made my intro music for me, which will be on every episode, and we'll get better. This will get better with time. And he's really very, very talented. So you guys go find his stuff. Chris is awesome, and we're tentatively planning to be one of their first families out there to use their new service and go visit New Zealand and Australia. So when that happens, probably sometimes next year, we'll do a whole episode series of going out there and exploring, and I'm sure showing off what they do. So now I'm going to do this quick. I'm going to show you guys these lovely gift boxes with some ribbon on them that come. I have to do this because this lovely, lovely woman makes the most amazing cookies, I think, probably I've ever had. Yeah, I'm going to go ever had. They're amazing. They would probably protect you from rape better than Kegel exercises, these cookies. Like, that's how awesome they are. I don't know. But there's the box. They come in their own little ribbons. I will have the link for her shop in the description as well. They're just, and make an awesome gift. She sends these things like individually packaged with the ribbons and the tissue paper, and there's glitter in there. And for the price, for what she sells, look at what you get. It's like more than look at that. It's like a never-ending box of cookies, and they are stinking delicious. I mean, just last time I bought a bunch, and I thought, I'm going to give these as gifts to my kids' teachers, to, the kind of gifts you do that are less personal. Usually you get them like an apple or a candy apple or but whose
cookies were they?
It's Kim's Cookie Shop, and I will share the link in the description on this video. And
Yep.
I bought a bunch last time, and I had to reorder more because I bought them, and I said I'm gonna give these out as gifts. And I tried one, and before I knew it, the entire 2 boxes just gone. You guys, I don't know what happened, but I had to get more because I didn't have any gifts left. But seriously, for your money, they are better than any gourmet, anything you're going to get store-bought. They're amazing. She charges very reasonable prices for what she sends you. It's just tons and tons. She makes bear cookies. Look at those. She makes baby bear cookies, which is like a bag that comes with a ton of little tiny baby bears. She makes a bunch of different flavors. All kinds of just awesome stuff, guys, and they're delicious. So, holidays aren't quite over yet. Go order some of Kim's cookies because you won't regret it. Seriously, just make sure you set them aside. Don't eat them all in a day like I did. It's probably not good for me.
Link in the description.
Link in the description. I will give you guys the Kim's cookies link in the description. She is Leet Bear's wife. So, yeah, does amazing stuff. So, I just wanted to give her a quick shout out and open those on camera. And then my stuff is this channel, The Dive. This is going to be my channel where I'm putting all kinds of new stuff and content. And I will be promoting various people's stuff. Anybody that wants to come on has a specific topic they'd like a deep dive on. You guys shoot me suggestions and I will cover it. And I will soon be self-publishing my first book. So you guys will get all the info on that when that comes out. And, yeah. You guys want to add anything before we sign off?
Yeah, awesome. Yep.
Subscribe to PewDiePie. That's all.
Oh, you didn't just do that. Smack.
No. No. He's already got enough subscribers.
No, he doesn't.
Subscribe to us.
Okay.
Our channel.
He's not even entertaining anyway. Subscribe to Owen if you haven't.
Okay.
Owen
You do
Benjamin.
Yeah, and Nimmer, Eric Nimmer. Subscribe to his channel. But here, we need subscribers. Share it around.
All the Bear Jasons.
And look for new content. I've got
Watch
goals set.
Michael Knowles and Andrew Clavin. We're not quite sure about the other guy at this stage.
And The Dive.
No, he's all right too.
If you want deep dives, come to The Dive because we're gonna keep digging. And this will get better with the overlays and stuff. But yeah, any topics that you guys want to see covered, I'm serious. Anything that you want a deep dive done on, don't suggest people. Just shoot us a comment, and we'll look into it. We'll deep dive it. Shoot it.
Yep.
We'll do it. Right? Yes.
Damn right.
The next episode, the next group show with the 3 of us we're doing, Joey is going to pick the topic for that. So we'll see what he comes up with. All right.
Alrighty.
Have a good
Awesome.
Christmas, guys. Bye.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Yep. Bye-bye.